On the final day of February 2026, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader who ruled Iran for over 3 decades, died in the attack. Today, Iran is once again plunged into immense uncertainty and turmoil. The entire world is asking, where will a post-Khamenei Iran head? It seems everyone has long forgotten what this land once looked like. But would you believe that a mere 50 years ago, this place was the Paris of the Middle East? Back then, the streets of Tehran were filled with disco clubs. Young people were chasing rock and roll, and it was even the Western world's closest ally in the region. How could a country, in just a single generation, go from a glamorous, secular kingdom to the theocratic state it is today? To understand the Iran of today, you must first decipher the character of this land. 2.5 millennia ago, at the crossroads of Eurasia, this place witnessed the birth of humanity's first true superpower, Persia. Its founder, Cyrus the Great, did not rule by slaughter. He liberated enslaved populations and respected faiths. The Persia of that time established a logic that lasted for a millennium. An empire needs the awe of its subjects, but it needs accommodation and compromise even more. Over the next 2,000 years, this plateau transformed into a cruel slaughterhouse of empires. Greeks, Arabs, Turkic tribes, and Mongols, wave after wave of conquerors swept in on horseback, trying to completely wipe out Persian culture with swords. But what was the result? They ultimately could not escape the same destiny, being assimilated by Persian civilization. It is as if this land holds a certain magic that can turn all invaders into believers of Persian culture. Until the 7th century, the iron hooves of the Arabs brought Islam. The Persians accepted the faith, yet deep within their hearts, they refused to become Arabs. By the 16th century, to draw a definitive line against the Sunni world surrounding them, Iranian rulers made a decision that completely altered their destiny. They established the minority sect of Islam, Shia Islam, as their state religion. This was not merely a change of allegiance, but an invisible national border, completely isolating Iran from the entire Arab world. Fast forward to the 20th century. Persia, which once looked down upon all others, had become a weak pawn on the British and Russian chessboard. In 1921, the military-born Reza Khan established the Pahlavi dynasty. After World War II, his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, inherited the throne. The year 1953 marked a decisive turning point. The then democratically elected Prime Minister, Mossadegh, attempted to nationalize the British-controlled oil industry, but met a joint assassination attempt orchestrated by the American CIA and British MI6. With a few maps, a few documents, and a few boxes of bribe money, a meticulously planned coup directly overthrew Mossadegh, and Western powers handed absolute authority back to the Shah. In this moment, the national dignity of the Iranians was shattered. They suddenly realized that the monarch high above was merely a puppet of Western capital. The seeds of hatred towards America were firmly buried into the soil of Iran. But the Shah was completely unaware. He made a fortune during the oil crisis in the 1970s. To show off the revival, in 1971, he hosted an extremely lavish celebration beside the ruins of the ancient city of Persepolis, claiming it was to celebrate the 2,500th anniversary of the founding of Persia. Beside that winding, 70-meter-long table sat over 60 heads of state, with champagne and French cuisine, costing hundreds of millions of dollars. When Western journalists questioned this extreme extravagance, the Shah arrogantly responded, "What am I supposed to do? Serve them bread and radishes? This is simply our traditional Persian hospitality." You see, this is the Shah's logic. He could see the glorious Persian antiquity from 2 millennia ago. Yet he remained blind to the slums just a few kilometers away, where the wealth gap widened rapidly and despair was spreading. The secret police, Savak, secretly suppressed all voices, and Iran had transformed into a pressure cooker that could explode at any time. While the Shah was immersed in his imperial dream, a specter was quietly rising in the shadows. Ayatollah Khomeini. He was originally just a traditional scholar exiled overseas, but in that era of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism, Khomeini showed an astonishing political sense. He packaged ancient religious scriptures into the most fashionable liberation theology. He borrowed left-wing vocabulary, calling the bottom-class people the oppressed, and condemned the Shah as the running dog of America. Even in the eyes of the Western left at the time, this robed religious leader was already a revolutionary hero fighting against hegemony. This ideological misreading allowed him to once gain unexpected sympathy from the Western camp. Khomeini's sermon tapes acted like sparks, quietly spreading through the streets and alleys of Tehran. However, Western society remained unaware of this dark fire. On New Year's Eve of 1977, U.S. President Jimmy Carter smiled at a dinner in Tehran and called Iran an island of stability in the turbulent Middle East. Carter could never have imagined that merely months later in 1978, the long-accumulated social contradictions completely erupted. This was an extremely rare all-class uprising. Marxists, secular liberals, students demanding democracy, traditional merchants, and lower-class Shia believers. These groups with completely different demands formed a massive alliance under the sole consensus of overthrowing the dictatorial monarchy. In early 1979, the Shah fled in disgrace. Khomeini returned to Tehran amid the cheers of tens of millions of people. Initially, secular intellectuals naively believed that after the monarchy was overthrown, the country would restore democracy, and religious leaders would retreat behind the scenes. But they severely underestimated Khomeini's tactics. Simply put, according to traditional Shia doctrines, no one should establish an Islamic state before the return of the Savior. But Khomeini said that in the era of the Savior's absence, the state cannot be headless. It must be governed by someone proficient in religious law. This is the subversive theory created by Khomeini, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. This theory directly broke traditional taboos, completely locking religious power and secular power together. As the machinery of the guardianship of the Islamic jurist began to operate, those left-wing students and intellectuals who once fought alongside them suddenly woke up. They had overthrown a dictator wearing a crown, only to welcome a stricter absolute master. Once the mask of power was torn away, the state machine began a legalized deprivation against the whole society. The previous family protection law was abolished, and the marriage age for women was lowered to 9. Under this system, the value of women was legally depreciated. In court, the testimony of 2 women was only equal to that of 1 man. The compensation for a woman's accidental death was also only half that of a man's. They lost the right to actively divorce, and once divorced, they would even lose custody of their older children. What they got in return was beatings from the religious police and being forced to wear black headscarves. The political purges were equally cold and ruthless. Universities were closed indefinitely, and a so-called cultural revolution swept the country. By the summer of 1988, the purge evolved into a cruel massacre that shocked the world. Thousands of leftists and political prisoners who refused to compromise on their beliefs were secretly hanged in prisons, and even tombstones were not allowed to be erected. Those youths who had once shouted for democracy ultimately fell in the revolutionary storm they had awakened with their own hands. The Iran-Iraq War that broke out in 1980 unexpectedly became a catalyst for the new regime to consolidate its power. The survival crisis of foreign invasion stimulated Iran's strong nationalism, and the theocratic government used this to achieve absolute iron-fisted control internally. In 1989, Khomeini passed away. After intense power struggles, a man wearing a black turban came to power. He is Ali Khamenei. From then on, he led Iran into a long winter of fighting the West to the end. Looking back at these magnificent and suffering 100 years, Iranians have experienced 2 extreme social experiments. The Pahlavi dynasty tried to use power to erase tradition from top to bottom, resulting in a collapse, while the Islamic Republic tried to use strict laws and severe punishments to confine society within the chains of religion. But the result was years of economic stagnation and the deep disillusionment of the younger generation. Today, more than 30 years later, this former land of the Persian Empire is still in turmoil. This time, how will the Iranian people choose?